One of the areas that's not really all that well appreciated is that these machine guns didn't simply appear at the beginning of the First World War. These guns were produced and in widespread use in the 1890s, so 20 full years before the outbreak of World War I. And there is a question of, what did they do? Why did people go into World War I not understanding and appreciating the horrific deadliness of these guns when they'd existed for 20 years? And there are some interesting reasons for that. These guns were not seen as really representing the true, proper, gentlemanly fighting spirit of how European armies should act. The Continental armies, and this is particularly evident with the French approach to war at the beginning of the Great War, was much more glamorous and glorified. It wasn't supposed to be one guy behind a machine gun simply mowing down the enemy. That's not what war was supposed to be. So in Great Britain in particular, it was colonial commanders who first truly developed an understanding of how to effectively use the early Maxim guns. They were in a position where they had very limited manpower, they had limited resources, and they were fighting vastly outnumbered all the time. And they were able to take these machine guns and first really understand how to use them against large numbers of attacking enemy. Unfortunately for the British, these commanders weren't really all that influential back home. And when they would come home talking of the phenomenal firepower and potential effectiveness of the Maxim guns, they weren't really paid any attention. We also have the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 and 05. This was really the first truly mechanized war where machine guns like the early Maxims and the early Hotchkiss guns were put into use. We actually see entrenched positions defended by machine gun emplacements. And they were just as effective then as they would prove to be in World War I. Now, there were military observers from all the great European states in this conflict sending back reports, and they too didn't really get the recognition that they probably should have. Now, the German army took these a little more seriously. At the beginning of the war, the German army had the most machine guns and was kind of at the leading edge, as far as there was such a thing in mainland Europe. But it would take the course of the war for all of the major powers to vastly multiply the number of machine guns that they had on hand. No one truly appreciated the effectiveness of these guns. Despite having ample opportunity to have seen them, no one really understood it until the war truly got started. So rather than try to just explain this lack of understanding of the machine gun, I think I can get the point across better by relaying some of the words of a non-com in the British Army named Edward Spears, who was in the 11th Hussars, a very fine and glorious, glamorous cavalry unit in the British Army. They'd been in the charge of the Light Brigade, and that was the sort of history that this unit had. Well, Spears was put in command of the machine gun section, and he was quite the fan of the machine gun, probably naively so at the time. He says, on this occasion, the whole brigade was carrying out mounted mass formation maneuvers under the brigadier in the Long Valley, and I was in charge of the brigade machine guns. Full of enthusiasm and finding a mound, a hill, with a beautiful view of the brigade moving about in a solid mass of horsemen less than 1,000 yards away, I crept up and mounted my machine guns there. He goes on to talk about how he set up some lines of retreat in case anyone happened to, a cavalry troop decided to charge at them to try and eliminate them, but no one did through this whole exercise. He fired a few rounds of blanks just to get people's attention and got no attention. So, nothing of the sort happened. No one paid the least attention to us. So for 10 minutes, I fired away at the nominal rate of 600 rounds per minute per gun. Then, concluding that every one of the 2,000 men of the brigade would have been killed at least twice over, and it would be a pure waste of ammunition to go on firing, I stopped. Exhilarated at this holocaust, which perforce included most of my friends, I cantered up to the brigade commander, who he describes as a dark and hard-looking sort, very stoic British Army old guard sort of commander. Anyway, Spears comes up and says to him very happily, "You are all dead, sir," telling him that his command has all been annihilated. The commander instead glowered at him. Expecting in my innocence some congratulations, I realized from this expression that something had gone wrong. The gallopers sitting in their horses about the commander looked blank. Then the general spoke at last. "Never," he said, "never have I seen a lack of cavalry spirit more blatantly displayed." Turning to those about him, he rasped out, quote, Here is a young cavalry officer who has the impertinence to say that the infantry weapons he is so inappropriately carting about has wiped out the 1st Cavalry Brigade, the finest mounted force in Europe. "Get off your horse, sir," he barked at me, and hand it over and walk back to the barracks, the proper form of locomotion for you. That pretty well describes the general European attitude towards machine guns.